There we go. So I'm going to show you guys how to do this process that was outlined in homework. So we're going to work through each one of the steps. I'm not going to do the entire figure because it would take a little bit too long, but I'm going to get the base color silhouette so that we can use that for more convenient painting. We'll be applying local color either on multiple layers or on one layer, depending on how complicated I want to make it. Applying cast and turning form shadows as well as occlusion shadows, which are two separate things, and then viewing it all together and probably putting a little bit of special effects over the top. Things like glow and camera effects are what would be considered special effects in this case. So let's go ahead and get started then. I've got this sketch that I did a while back, and I've just opened it up in Photoshop and made it large enough to do a nice painting over. But let me delete this one layer just so that we're starting from ground zero. It is black ink on gray. Although the goal is eventually to get rid of the line work entirely, that means that there's one extra little step here, because if I'm blending this gray background on top of what other colors I choose, it's going to darken, and if I try to color sample, it's going to get in the way of my work process a lot. So first thing, I'm going to show how to work around that. I'm going to go ahead and just make another layer, and we can pick really any color we want to, but I do want to fill this with a color so that I can see whether or not my line work is superimposed on anything. You can't put a layer beneath an initial background until you unlock it, so I'm just going to double click on that layer and hit OK. Lock goes away, and now we can shuffle them. There we are. And so we can see I can't see any of my green right now. And if you select the line work layer and choose multiply, there we go, we can see through. So the problem is, if I color sample this, it's very, very different from the actual color on that layer. And if I paint it, you can see probably a little bit visually that there's a difference between the two. So what I want to do is either fade this out or use a different blending layer, or mess with the actual layer style options to get rid of the gray in the background. I just accidentally hid Discord. There we go. So one thing I usually like to do is mess with these two settings down here, this blend if gray. If I take this and I start to reduce it down, there's going to be a point where the gray just pops out of existence, like right there. And now you can see a huge difference between that color that I color sampled and this original one. Right at that point, that means I hit the threshold of that gray value, but you can see that my line work looks terrible. Okay, these little pointers on either end, they can be split if you hold down Alt, and so I can just drag this up, and it sort of softens that effect, but you can see some of that darkness comes back. So I actually have to push it this way, not the other way. So wherever that background stops changing color, that's where I've got all of my gray gone. Or to reset this, I can just drag it over, find that threshold again, right about there, and then only drag the left-hand side of this to soften it a bit. And it's okay if my line work gets pretty blurry and out of whack, because we're not going to keep it anyway. But I just want to make sure that I can continually see it. So that's one way that we could do this. If you don't have Photoshop, though, I don't know how you would achieve that same thing in different programs. So let's just try real quick to see if I can get this to work with just a different blending layer, because blending layers exist in just about all digital art programs. Typically the ones that will darken from this layer are all right here in a group. So we try darken, multiply, color burn, it's just gone, linear burn. None of those really work. The next set, darker color, lighten, screen, these aren't going to do anything even close to what we want. Lighter color, overlay. Okay, so we got to go down a bit, and at the point that we go to like pin light is almost there. Like it's slightly changing the background color just a little bit. It's almost there. Hard mix, not really doing it. Difference, exclusion, subtract, divide. We can find maybe, oh, I accidentally painted on this drawing. Luminosity looks like a winner right here. So luminosity appears to only be darkening the line work, and this appears to be left alone. Let's try by sampling the background color and then painting, and if nothing changes, then we've done it correctly. and just ignore the fact that I accidentally painted on this layer earlier. In fact, I'll go ahead and erase that dot. So there we go. We've got a little hole. Okay, so we can see it. I can see a tiny little difference between the two here. Very, very small. But I guess using like a luminosity would probably be all right. And then if we just turn down the opacity a bit, that effect is going to lessen even more to the point that you're not even going to see it. But for the case of our demo, I'm going to go back in here and change this to multiply. Actually, color burn I tend to like a little bit more if it works. This time it doesn't appear to. And lower this down to where that disappears, and then spread it out just a little bit. There we go. And we could even turn down the opacity a little bit beyond that if we really wanted to get a very, very subtle kind of effect here. All right, so all of our coloring should probably take place underneath this layer, but I've just got a completely filled layer back here right now. I prefer to work that way rather than on transparency, because if I delete this layer, transparency is this checkerboard pattern, which is, in my opinion, really obnoxious, and I don't like to have to deal with. So I usually fill in just some gray or something like that, or a color, what have you. It doesn't really matter as long as you can look at it for a long period and not be annoyed by it. Let's try something bluish. How about like that? And I'll just fill that in. And I'm just going to leave that alone. We can call this background. You should probably have a background on your character. I did provide one in the folder, or you can make one. A nice flat color background is fine. This next layer that I'm making, this is going to be our base shape. So I'm going to name that. So what our base shape layer is for is just filling in the pug. Okay, so I've got this kind of grayish white color that I picked before we started recording. And that's going to help a lot because every layer that we do except for the base color is going to be black or something darkening. And so it's good to pick a grayish or whitish color. I try not to go all the way up to white because I might want to put on highlights and things on top of this. And so I just pick like this gray neutral color. And so on this layer, I'm just going to fill in the dog as neatly as I can, but also keeping in mind that we're probably going to change little bits of the outline shape as we move forward, because this will end up being the actual edge of our eventual painting. So I'm just going to fill in his back. I'm not going to worry about his paws and things because our demonstration is going to take place on his head. So I'll just fill it in about that well and then move up to the rest of the head. I'll show you what I mean because I'll turn off the line work layer in just a moment. But usually this process is the same every time. I just go around the edges, carefully filling in the shapes that I want, and worrying about the middle later because you can use a much larger brush to do that quickly. Okay, just about like that. And so once I've got this in place, I won't have to worry about going outside the lines ever again. And usually per subject matter, I'll just fill in one large cutout shape like this. And if there are other shapes that I want to separate later, I can always do that with a clipping mask, or I could just paint right on top of this layer once I lock the pixels. Okay, so first check to do, let's do that, would be turning off that to make sure that there aren't any holes right near the edge. Okay, of course there's a big hole right in the middle, so let's fill that in. Okay, but I'm looking for blue because if I can see it now, then it will be a giant hole in my painting forever. You can also see how messy the edge can get when it's covered up by line work. So take a look at like this ear, for instance. It's covered up by that line work right now, but we're trying to get rid of that. So I actually have to do an even more careful job of shaping this out than I have. You could turn it off entirely and just remember what you saw, but really what I prefer is to just turn the opacity very low so that I can see exactly what that edge should be shaped like, and then do one more pass with larger brush strokes and a little bit more care. And at this point I have to use eraser as well because I do want transparency to be what this is surrounded by. Don't want to paint blue around it. That looked okay. Let's see. Do it a little bit farther out. Sometimes you can go right to the inside of this line work. You don't want to do that either. You kind of want to go through the center of the line work. So try to split the difference. Okay. Trying to go fast enough to have a smooth line, but slow enough to control my brush. The eyeball looks nice and smooth. This does not. And you can always come back in and shape this a little bit more later, but whatever shading techniques you have might be destroyed in that process unless you're using clipping masks a lot. So just be aware of that. I want to see my line work one more time. Did I intend that ear to be sharp? No, didn't. Okay, that's fine. So take your time here. If you have to do things like this and cut, whoop, that's the wrong layer, and cut into your original shape, then that's okay. Get this part working nice, and then come back over here and fix this, and just keep a careful eye on it. Zoom in nice and close so that you can see what you're doing, and then you can always double check by turning off your line work layer. Okay. These are just the wrinkles on his head, so they're not critical. That's his ear. I've smoothed that out nicely. Cheek looks nice, neck looks nice. You can kind of see a little error here. There's a little bit of the background showing. There's also another small error right here. I am actually using a marker brush which is not full opacity, right? And so I've got a greater chance of that happening. That's more for demonstration purposes than what I would actually do. I would pretty much just use one that didn't have any opacity transfer with pressure, but I wanted to see little bits of errors like that so I could point them out, show you what they look like. So there we go, pretty much good. I'll turn back on the line work so that we can see what we're doing, but I'm also going to lock the transparency on that layer. So now, as we've seen before, when I paint on this layer, whatever it is I choose, it can't go outside that layer. So I could do all my painting on this layer if I want to, or more likely I'm going to use clipping masks so that I don't accidentally mess up this edge, and I've got a nice clean base to work on top of. Okay? Any questions about that first process? I went pretty quick, but it is sort of review.
Nope.
Good. All right, so let's do our shadow layers. Let's start there. So for shadows, this would be where is the light direction coming from, and what does it hit, and where does it transition? Usually, I like to pick a shadow color. It's going to be something fairly dark, and I usually put it in the blue spectrum, because if you think about it, the skylight is going to bounce into the shadows more than like direct sunlight. So you tend to get bluer shadows or something like that. You don't really have to pick and commit, because once you paint it, you could just lock the entire layer and fill it in with a different color, or you could use layer adjustments to change it. But I like to start somewhere, usually around here for my shadow color. And then I'm just not going to change that at all. I'll use hard and soft brushes, but that's it. So what we're going to do is think about which direction should the light be coming. I'm just going to use this for demonstration. And what surface is it going to hit? Well, in my illustration, I've actually got this like heavenly hot dog that's shining light straight down like this. But we could choose to have this slightly behind the dog or slightly in front of the dog. I'll have it, I'm going to try to make it like right on top, so directly above, which means that like this surface would get hit with light, okay? And these under surfaces down here, let's do that, would be shadowing, and they would transition between the two, okay? So top of his nose would get hit, top of his wrinkle would get hit, the upper surfaces of all of these things, including tongue, would be illuminated. This part under here might be halfway, because although it's facing upward, it's being shadowed by the eyeball shape. And then underneath here, underneath the tongue, and the tongue might even cast a shadow downward like that. Underneath the chin, all of this would be in shade. Like that. There. And of course under here. And probably the farther down we go, the more of that is going to be present. So I'm just sort of illustrating it in to show what I'm going to be thinking about. But down here, we're going to have a lot more of it. Okay. And then here, we're going to have a little bit of it. Up here, we'll have a bit less. And then up here, we'll have least of all. Okay. Same thing will be true in the opposite direction. We're not actually painting light, but if we were, we'd have a lot more light up here and a little less as we start to move down. except in the case of things that are rotated straight up like that, and then very little to none as we get about halfway down the face like that. So you can see painted this way it looks really bizarre, but it also kind of looks like chrome or something, like we've got some weird reflections going on. But that's going to be the basic approach. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of all that, and we can get rid of the arrows too, I think. We don't really need that. So let's try to paint on some turning form shadows here. Initially, come on. Hey, oh, did I still have my eraser on? Uh-oh, what'd I do? Oh yeah, I still got my eraser on. Initially, I'm just going to paint with nice solid edges, because I'll worry about, oh, I didn't mention that yet. I'll worry about how soft the transition needs to be second. So right now, as I'm painting, I'm going clearly outside the dog. Okay, so let's enable this as a clipping mask. So if we right-click, create clipping mask, the way that it works is this will become indented, and then this is incapable of moving onto any pixel that doesn't already have opaque pixels on this base layer. So if I went back and moved or erased from this base layer, then the shadow shape would have to change. But if I paint outside the edge like that, we can't see out there. Okay, so for the sake of simplicity, I'll just say the whole cheek area down here below the muzzle probably going to be dark. We'll just assume for now that's going to be dark. I don't know what's going to be going on the neck, but I'll just fade it out by that point, and we won't worry about it. And I'm just going to try to illustrate it in. So underneath these jowls, right, probably going to have some shadow right here too. We'll treat the tongue separate. Here's his chin. The chin will probably be shaded on at least the lower half of it, something like this. Okay. I'm going to have to switch back and forth between eraser and pen a lot. The tongue is facing almost straight up, so we could just leave that lit. I'll go ahead and fill in this little space down here. Okay. Let's see, for these gels, I did say I want probably more as we're down pretty far, so I'll fill it in like this. Try to get some nice lines initially. This is an eye wrinkle over here. I think probably about here. And then I'll try to think about how much shadows will be cast as a second step. But for now, this eye wrinkle, we'll just kind of fill it in like that. And remember to use both tools. Use your paint tools and use your eraser. They kind of work in tandem. With both of them, you can get nice shaping. Let's see. So here's another eyebrow wrinkle right there. Just for the sake of simplicity, I'll probably fill that in as well. And here's the muzzle shape again on this side. I guess we probably have that creep up a little bit, like here. And even if I'm wrong about this, we turn all these shadows on and it looks really weird, I can come back and very easily edit this. And we'll say like that. This eyebrow, or this eye wrinkle, and have it extend out to here. Shadowing portion of that. There we go. Underside of the nose, definitely. That would be more of a cast shadow though. So let's hold off just a moment. The eyeball. Yep. I'm going to say probably about this much. Something like that. Okay. And I want to have nice sharp lines eventually, but in a first pass just be nice and quick, fill them in, and then see how it looks. Because you'll probably catch a few obvious mistakes. Okay, this little weird, whatever you call that, the tear duct thing. Okay, how about on this side? We'll fill this in. Okay, about like that. Give it just a little bit more, and then try to trim it down to a sharper shape. I'm just trying to think about these as three-dimensionally as I can, make it make sense in this context. There's the tear duct, okay, something like that. And then we've got these wrinkles, and these wrinkles should have very little shadow on them, but they should have a bit. Okay, something like this, and then it'll probably get quite hazy past that point, although this side could have just a little bit more. Like that. Where dark things and light things bump into each other, that's what's going to create your edges. So just know that the top of this is going to be lit, and the bottoms of these are going to be dark. And so likely I should really just fill this whole space in like this right away, and then erase out the shape of this overlapping muzzle bit, because that will give me a better edge. Okay, so sometimes you can think about it backwards like that, unless I want this to intrude down in here and kind of show a little bit of overlap. Let's do this. A little bit in the creases, especially on this side, I think. I'm going to turn my brush smaller and smaller as I work my way towards these details. Something like that. Trying to get a nice shape on these. And then finally this one. Yeah, not too much, really. Probably need to just fill in these crease areas here and here, because it'll make sense that those be deeply in shadow. Okay, and right down through here as well. Okay, so let's see up here again. Smooth that out a little. Alright, so this should be close enough to at least turn this layer into a multiply layer, and then drop the opacity. So there we go. At around 50%, 40%, something like that, you can see it starts to take on a halftone quality from the original drawing. If I turn off the lines entirely, you can see the pug starting to take shape, even though it's not 100% defined. We're starting to get that effect. Okay. Any questions about that process? I can keep painting while this is semi-transparent. I just don't want to change my color at all. No questions about that process? You guys good?
So just putting it kind of clearly, what you did was you just created a new layer, had the line work as the top layer, and then created a clipping mask for the shadows.
Well, first I had to create that shape, right? It doesn't work without this shape. Right, so line work on top, shape underneath, then a layer for the shadows, and then it's a clipping mask. So the reason the clipping mask works is because of this layer down here.
Gotcha. And for Krita to create a clipping mask, is it the same thing as just a transparency mask? Because it's got different settings.
I believe so. Let me check real fast, because Krita's kind of weird in the way they make you do it. But let's verify it real quick. I'm loading up Krita. I'll just open up this. There we go. So I've got my layer here. I'll put a layer underneath, which Krita doesn't stop you from doing right away. Alright. So I need a different brush. Let's just do that one. Okay, so I can't see anything because it's all filled with gray. So let's turn that upper layer into a multiply. Or what worked? Luminosity worked. Ooh, it doesn't look the same here. We'll just leave it as a multiply and turn down the opacity a bit for now. And I'll put a layer in the very background, just like I did with the other one, for the sake of making it look a lot nicer and easier to view. So here we've got our base layer. We'll just pretend that I did a good job there. Okay. Now if I believe it's just convert, right click the base layer. Oh, it's group, quick clipping group. So group, quick clipping group. So now this mask layer is the one that is going to be prevented from doing anything other than the base layer. Alright, so we want, there we go. So this mask layer can't go outside the base layer. So this would be the shadows that I was just painting, and this would be the basic shape of the dog, like I was demonstrating before.
Gotcha.
Okay. So if we trim all that away, get the correct color, head, and then over on this layer, using our shadow color, fill in whatever it is we want, and it can't go outside the bounds.
So within that clipping group, you would do the base shape as like the layer 2, and then the mask layer would be the shadows.
Yep, base, yep, shadow. And for all the other ones, just add a new layer and put it inside this folder. So if the layer that you create starts out here, just drag it within this clipping group. And so this can be our occlusion layer or special effects or whatever. They'll all be locked to this base layer. It is contingent though on this little letter A being clicked. So on this occlusion layer that I just made, which is going to be our next shadow pass, you can see right now this is not working, but if I click this A, now it does work again.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. So here we are back in Photoshop. And let me just take a quick look at what I've made so far to see if it's working. Basically, looks like it's working. I don't know what this is here, some sort of wrinkle, but I think it needs to be dark, at least a little bit, like that. Maybe it's picking up some light or something. And then his ears, I'm not entirely sure. They're kind of angled upward, honestly, but they'd probably have like a little edge of shadow at the very least, like this. Maybe in there. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe at some point this would turn into a shadowy tone as it moves down. We could say. Once it gets all the way down there, it starts to recede into shadow. Okay, so we'll say that's our first pass, and it's just sort of like how angled is the object towards the top. That's all I was really thinking about. Now let's think about what would block light and cast a shadow on something else. Okay, if I did this on a separate layer, then it would make it harder for me to make the shadows a uniform tone. So I'm going to keep working on the same layer, but just know that this is a slightly different question I'm asking. Okay, so for instance, in the easiest demonstration is the nose and the tongue. I didn't shade anything to do with the nose yet because the nose is fairly flat against this form, so it would probably be in full light like this. But it also sticks out, and so it would have a little shadow underneath it, little nose-shaped shadow right down here. So to render that, I would sort of just trace out this shape somewhat like this. And then think about, instead of what shape is this, what shape is the profile of this, the front of it? It would be fairly smooth and flat. And so I'm just going to fill that in kind of like this, as if the profile of the nose is kind of blocking in a small shadow. Now if it is directly straight up, this might be a little bit more exaggerated and long, like that. So let's go ahead and do that. And then I'll use the eraser to trim back down, kind of like this. And then I'm also going to use the eraser to get rid of this effect right next to the nose. Unless I think that there are shadows on the nose as like turning form shadows. But this is kind of like the cast shadow that I just decided on as I'm trimming this away. So that would be like pure cast shadow right there. I could just go ahead and put in, like, to say that the nose has a little bit of a shadowing effect across it as well. And so then it makes this kind of a compound. Okay, something like that. Yeah, okay. Let's look at the jowls then. They come to a crease in the middle, which I didn't really render out properly. And so something like here, and I want to kind of find it myself because we don't want a huge gap there. Okay, something like that. And then however soft I think this flesh is, there might be a little turnaround up here at the top. So I'm going to take actually just a little bit off of that side and off of that side. So we're getting like a little tiny gap between the two, just like that. Inside the mouth obviously is going to be in shadow because that's fully inside like a cavern kind of shape. So I'll just darken all of that in. The tongue, I didn't actually put a turning form shadow on the tongue at all, but there should be one, at least a little one on this side, I think, this lower edge. So that will bring this all the way around like that. Maybe slightly more as the tongue starts to angle away over on this side. But the reason I started talking about this is that the tongue is going to cast a shadow, right? It's sticking out of the mouth. This is the chin / lower lip. Okay, so that's going to be blocking shadow, and that shadow is going to cast right across this and make it impossible for light to shine down on it. If you think the tongue is really, really thin, then it would probably make a shadow like this, and we get a little pocket of light on the far side. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to fill it in entirely like that. Okay, so there we go. We've only got one little triangle of light making it to that chin now. Okay. Same thing would be true for these skin flaps. They would cast onto this face down here, but I've already darkened that in, so we don't really have to worry about that. The eyeballs, though, are probably going to have that same effect. Would this just be making shadows or occlusion? I'm still just making shadows, no occlusion yet. Occlusion is sort of like on an overcast day where only creases matter. This is a cast shadow I'm thinking about now, whereas before I was thinking of a turning form shadow. So for a small demonstration of the difference, so on this ball, this would be the turning form shadow. Okay, this would be the cast shadow. Okay, they're both shadows. They both need to be rendered, but they're clearly different, right? When everything is touching like this, though, it becomes harder to tell the difference. So that would be like if this ball was sitting on the actual ground, like that. Well, somewhere in there is the contact point of that ball, but we can't see it because it's all shadow by that point. Okay? Hopefully that clears it up just a little bit. All right, so what we're thinking about is what would the eye block, right? So the eye would block some sort of semicircular shape down here, and I think I would just go right in this direction until it cuts that off. Okay, and then the rest of that is just shadow. Same thing over on this side, but I think it would pretty much get this entire shape. Maybe not. Maybe there would be a little bit of light showing, but we'll assume that it gets that entire shape like that. These wrinkles aren't really going to cast much of a shadow on the eyeball because the eyeball sticks way out and up like that. It's possible that there would be a little tiny sliver blocked by that, but that's what occlusion is going to cover, so we won't worry about it. What it probably would get, let me turn off this layer so I can see more clearly what I drew. So this bit is sticking out and upward. So I'm going to fill this whole area in so I can erase away that other shape, because I want it to clearly look like it protrudes from on top of that, something like this. And then, whoop, my bad, there we go. It would have its own turning form shadow like this, and then potentially a cast shadow, but in this case it's far too small. Okay, so something like that. So that's probably about right. Let's do just a little bit. Just a little bit on this side, so it's like intruding on that space. There we go. And remember, I haven't softened up any shadows at all yet. On this shape, I like this. I think I'm just going to shave that off just a little. There we go. And right here. All right, all of that's in light. That's dark. This eye needs to cast a shadow as well. So somewhere in this direction, actually, you might get all of it. Well, here's another thing to keep in mind. Although the shadow for this would probably be like circular shaped, this wrinkle has this kind of contour to it. So the shadow might wrap around in this counter direction even though it's hitting the entire thing. So that's something we could do. I could try to take that into consideration down here and wrap it around that direction, but I just don't think that it's going to help the appearance in that case. On this side, though, I think it might help to do that just a little bit. And then fill back in these nice sharp shadows here. There we go. All right, got to turn this off again to see what it was I drew. Okay, so that's all wrinkle, and then this is the whatever that part, the tear duct. Okay, so I want a nice sharp round shape there. And I think I'm going to make this shadow run into that tear duct instead of where I had it, just for a little bit better shaping. Sometimes it's a stylistic choice more than a physics question, because I want to have a T intersection with this shadow and the shadow that extends out here, just because it's going to make it easier to see what's in front of what. Oh, wrong tool. There we go. And so I'm going to fill this in one more time like that, and then erase away a nice sharp round shape like that. Okay. Anything else that's casting on something besides the head casting down on the body, but we're not really dealing with that. These are too close together to really be casting any light on each other, although the crevices will be pretty obvious. And the ears are kind of extended out and away from the body. I guess there's a chance that this could cast on that ear, but honestly I think it's too far back for that to be happening. So we'll say, yeah, that's about this step. There we go. Any questions about that so far?
Not from me.
Okay. So before I soften any of these, like obviously you can see this is like a comic book, hard edged kind of shading that I've got going on right here. Before I soften any of that, I'm going to do the occlusion step, because it has predominantly the very, very soft shapes, and I don't want to confuse the two. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer. We'll call it Occlusion, or OCC for short. If it is not indented this same way, it is not a clipping mask. So you either have to clip it or click it and say create clipping mask, or you can drag it underneath the other layer and it should enable its clipping mask. Then you can shuffle these however you want. So either way, that's now going to be doing that. So here, I could turn off my shadow layer while doing this step, but I think I'd rather just leave it on for the moment. I'm going to need a very soft brush for this, so we're going to go for Airbrush Standard. And all I'm doing is putting darkness where things are close to each other. Okay, so that's going to be everywhere that there's a crease, for instance, like here, 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 all along here. And it doesn't matter if it's on the top or the bottom. So top of the eyes also, right? Inside cleft back here, but not this part of this wrinkle. You can see this looks pretty weird because this is a full opacity black that is being shown right now. Let's change it to multiply and then drop the opacity just a little bit so we can see through it. Okay, it's going to start making it look like a sculpture eventually, but I'm going to leave this pretty high to start out with so that I can see what I'm doing. In fact, let's put it all the way like 80. Okay, so here, here, underneath, and the amount of size is probably about how much space there is from this to the next thing. So I should really be turning the brush up a lot down here where it fades off gradually and there's nothing over here to touch anymore. Down under here as well. Should be a nice big brush. Where there's more stuff closer together, it should be a smaller, tighter brush. So let's do underneath the tongue. Okay, right here there would be a nice tight contact point, especially where this wrinkle is, but then as we extend away it should fade off. The really tough thing here is kind of tuning these shapes. Let's turn that and that off, because you can see they're really, really vague right now. There are going to be some places where you want it to suddenly transition, such as, okay, let's say right here next to the eyeball. I have a contact between this wrinkle and the eyeball, so I want soft shape in there. But now everything that I just painted went onto the ear as well, just then. So I should switch to my eraser and use my eraser to create a nice tight eraser line where that object no longer touches. So if I turn off these two, so you can see that nice tight transition from this to that. Okay, but the ear has its own thing going on. It's nearby the head, so there would be a big blurry shadow on the ear just by nature of being next to the head. So what you might have to do for the occlusion is make a lot of little temporary layers and repeatedly merge them in order to get this really correct, because one bit will start to intrude on another bit really fast. So let's do this as an example. One way of handling this, and I'll go ahead and use an eraser and get rid of any apparent shading on this ear whatsoever, just to do this example. There we go. Kind of like that. One way I could do this is by using a selection. So if I encircle the ear and then carefully draw these shapes like this. Okay, and if I do it slightly wrong, then I can add by holding down Shift. And what I'm kind of doing is a little temporary mask for myself to say, this is the only part I'm painting on right now. And so then I could work over the ear. I could do it on a different layer. I could do it on the same layer. In this case, I'll just do it on the same layer. But since that ear is in contact with the side of the head, or nearly, I want a very, very big, soft brush that's going to get tighter as it gets higher up, because it's going to be a little bit closer, I think. So up here, it's going to be a little bit closer. And then right here where it's contacting is probably the tightest of all. Okay. Then underneath here in this area, there's sort of another effect going on. So let me go ahead and just add a new blank layer. Underneath inside here, it's going to be pretty dark for occlusion. Let's turn off shadows too. It's going to be pretty dark for occlusion. But if I use my nice soft brush, then it goes all over the top of this also. Okay. So I'm going to do that and then erase. Right? Erase away all that stuff that I just put on like that. Over here, it kind of needs to be erased gradually. So I should probably switch to a soft eraser at that point. Up until now, I've been using a hard eraser for just about everything. So let's do an Airbrush Eraser. It does need to be fairly small, because now we're transitioning like that. So you can see in there, really dark because of the occlusion shadow. Let's get just a little bit more. There we go. I'm going to merge that. When you merge things, I'm going to make sure that I'm at 100% and that everything's just at a normal blending mode. Otherwise, you might get some unexpected results. So I'm just going to merge by doing Control E. And it won't let me, I think, because this is a clipping mask. And not even everything is showing. So if I grab both of them, let's see, will it let me merge selected? Doesn't seem to. So it doesn't like the fact that this is a clipping mask and that's not, and I'm trying to merge them right now. So I may have to temporarily release this clipping mask. Now I should be able to merge them. Now I could put it back into this clipping mask group. Okay, and I've got that compound effect there with this transition and the other one. Although that looks really bad because I turned the opacity back up all the way. I didn't really tune this very well, so I'd probably have to reattempt this again because I've got this really messy effect. Let me go back a few steps. Okay, so this one was fine. I spent a lot of time on that one. This one is not fine. I did a sloppy job. Or no, actually that's the other shadow, isn't it? That's this shadow. So I probably need to do a slightly better job on that one. So it's actually fine. Let's go ahead and remerge them. Re-enable the clipping mask. go to this layer, and I can turn all that stuff off now. And I would want to, yeah, do a better job on this one. It should still all be the exact same color. I haven't changed my color at all. But now I'm going to create a temporary layer. If they're both clipping masks, it shouldn't care as much about this. But yeah, it's probably because that shadow is going to have to be smooth. But let's get marker. Go over the top there. Make sure that this one is set to 100% and normal. Yeah, I think that's fine now. Just take a look at that. So the shadow shapes initially might have to be pretty sharp. Okay, let's merge those two and then clean it up just a little bit. So you can see, like, oh, wrong one. I'm going to start turning the line work off more and more. The more definition I get, the less I really need the line work. You can see some little messy bits here and there, like over here, which I should probably clean up down here, where we need to fill it in a little bit better, because when they start combining, they're going to look bad. And you may find that you drew shadows where you really shouldn't, or there were little holes in your shadow, or you did kind of a sloppy job like I did right here. One of the reasons we work in layers like this is because we can go back and forth and fix mistakes very, very easily like this. Whoops. And it's the benefit of working digitally. Okay, so there's a few little cleanups. There's the occlusion layer. There's our line work layer. Okay. So I'm going to turn this back down again. Okay, and to multiply. And this one I'll just leave at 100% because I want to see what I'm doing. Does all that make sense to you guys, though? I want to double check pretty frequently.
Yes.
So far, yeah.
So far? Okay. Airbrush Eraser. So what I'm doing is, as we get to the top here, I'm erasing out as we come to the edge of this so that it gets a little bit tighter and a little bit looser down here. Okay, although that's a pretty deep cleft. This one's also a cleft, so we want to have a little bit on there, though it's going to be a very, very little bit. This is not a very deep cleft at all. Okay, right here looks pretty ugly at the moment. So I'm going to switch to an eraser. And I definitely want to cut it off where it hits the ear back there, but this eyeball is turning a corner also, so the effect is going to go away because we can no longer see over here where it would be happening. So then for this one, let's grab all of that. So trying to skirt the ear. Okay. And then we only want this effect where the ear is near enough to the head, probably about there. Yeah, I think that'll do it. Let's see. And sometimes you'll get little tiny artifacts which look a bit bad. Just fill those in, or leave them. Might end up making it look nice. Okay, so right here where this tear duct is standing out, we want to erase the appearance of the occlusion a little bit. Okay. Same thing with this one. I can't even see where that one is. There it is. So right here is where I'm positioning that tear duct. So we want to erase that because that is not really in shadow. Okay. Just like that. Okay, anywhere else? I don't really like the shape of this one. Yeah, all the contact around the nose. So wherever it's deeper, so the nostrils it's a bit deeper, and then just underneath the nose and where it contacts it's really not much of anything. So just a little bit of that, and usually erasing the form that sticks out. So the form that sticks out is going to have far less of the shadowing. The thing that it's sticking onto is going to have a lot more of it. Down here, okay, and across the jowl, like that, erasing away from the tongue surface. And there really shouldn't be hardly any I made this a very, okay, no, yeah, because this is the whole object. There probably won't be very much of any occlusion shadowing on the tongue because it's sticking way out, except for right here where it's exiting the mouth. But it's not near anything. So, sort of a small shadow like that, and then I'll just erase it away as it exits the mouth, kind of like that. Underneath this jawline, we're going to want one like that, although big and vague now because we're so far down the head and all of these wrinkles are not too tightly packed. And that's about it. And we don't have any on the outsides. Nope, don't need that. Okay. Alright, well, let's see how it looks. I'm going to turn that off and then turn the layer down and let it be a multiply as well. This one goes way down. Okay, way, way down. Something like that. And so you can kind of see the dog taking shape. There's parts of it which need better definition for sure, and parts of it that maybe even it's a little bit too much. Okay, but we can kind of see this mask superimposed over the dog. Okay, but that's really all we're looking for. This sort of thing. See how that looks kind of creepy, like it's a sculpture on a cloudy day or something. But really, I would want to go through again and very much sharpen up the little creases and the lines between things, because that's where a lot of your definition is going to come from. If you look at the example here, all of the little lines between tiles are done in this shadowing step, either with cast shadows or with occlusion shadows. So you kind of have to pick which one you would use. I think I would probably use the cast shadows more likely for that really nice definition, those contact points. But right now they're missing because I just did a very simple shadow pass for that. Okay?
Yeah.
Good. All right. So let's keep going. Let's try to soften the turning form shadows now to get even a little bit more definition. And then I'll apply local colors on this background, and we should start to see a very strong impression of the dog. Okay. For this, because I did so much work already on that, in fact, let me save as onto my desktop here, just so I don't lose any progress. Because I did so much work on the shadow step and did a nice clean job of it, I'm going to duplicate this layer and turn the copy off. Oh, and this also needs to be a clipping mask like that. And I'm going to turn that copy off just so I have this to fall back on if I really mess it up badly. And on this original shadow layer, I'm going to start to soften these out. I do still want my pencils showing, but I'm going to try to turn them down even farther so that they're not intruding on this process. So this is going to require Airbrush Eraser, and it might require that I make certain selections to not interfere with neighboring shadows. For instance, if I'm using this Airbrush Eraser on this edge right here, it runs the risk of affecting this stuff and the nose and all the rest of that. So I may have to go around with like this lasso tool and grab just the parts that I want to affect. So probably like that. I don't want to affect this outer edge of that shadow because that hits something else entirely. I don't want to affect the lower edge of the shadow. I don't want to affect that. But I want to be able to have the largest tool that's available to me. So I'm going to go ahead and just airbrush erase away like that. So there we go. So now that's got a nice soft kind of transition to it. And I'm going to reduce the tool size a bit as we get up here. And airbrush erase away just on this edge, not on that one. Okay, there we go. Let's see, what else should I do? Definitely all of the top edges here. Want to give yourself enough room to work with, but also protect the things that need to be sharp. So it can be a little bit difficult to make this selection sometimes. There we go. And let me add a little bit more here just in case. Alright, so now with my airbrush eraser, usually the shadows are going to be sharpest nearby the objects that are casting them or nearby the other thing that's touching, and blurriest where they move away, and size matters. So if you've got small things, oh, that's the wrong tool entirely. If you've got small things, their shadows will be a bit sharper in general, and large things will have softer shadows. So on this nose, just going to be kind of a subtle effect here. But on his face and the larger shapes, then it's going to be a much more obvious effect. There we go. Turn it off just a little bit so I can see. That's probably even fine. Let's see. Just a little bit more. Okay, there we go. Now, on this cast shadow, we don't even really need to soften the cast shadows very much, but it's a nice step. I just want to protect this bit down here. Okay. So it can be nice, but again, sharper near where they are projecting from. Dang it, I keep grabbing the wrong. So I'm used to using the brush. There we go. So I'm trying to just kind of adjust that edge a bit so it no longer looks like it's an object unto itself. There we go. And up here that looks a bit too much. So actually I'm going to switch to hard eraser and trim this down just a little further. There. Go back to an airbrush eraser. Soften it just a bit more. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I would just keep going around like this. Here's a cast shadow from the tongue, and also a turning form shadow down here. So this turning form shadow would be very soft. This cast shadow would be sharp to soft. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and do the turning form shadow first, because it's probably going to mess up this cast shadow anyway. But I want to protect all of this over here, so I want to kind of, there we go, grab that. Let's see, I'm just going to temporarily do this. See how much more do I want to select. I want to make sure I protect that tongue also. Kind of like this. And we don't really need to worry about that because I'm not going to go that far, but we don't want it to affect anything down here either. Alright, so nice soft transition here, and you can see it's messing up that cast shadow. That's okay, I'm going to put it right back in just a moment. There we go. So it's as if that cast shadow isn't there at all. Then let's actually use an airbrush brush instead of going back and forth further. So then I'm going to fill that shadow back in, definitely all over here. And as we get closer, I'll make it smaller and smaller. Kind of like that. There we go. Let's see how that looks. I think I lost some of the curvature though. It should definitely be sharper than this, so I'm making it a little bit tighter. There we go. It's a bit better. Okay. Let's see, down here there's no opportunity, really. There's this wrinkle, there's the eyeballs, there's the tongue. Let's do the tongue. So in this case, there's not a whole lot to worry about except for this line here, which has to remain nice and sharp. So let's see. If you do both Shift and Alt, by the way, you can encircle an entire area and it will switch what is selected and what isn't. Actually, it didn't seem to. Oh, it's select within the original selection, I guess. All right, well, I'll do this the other way. I just want to make sure to get this shadow, not this edge or this edge out here. And I'm going to soften this a bit, so this one would be quite soft. And then this one would be tighter just because it's a smaller object. Like that. Okay. There's probably a cleft in the middle of the tongue also. I haven't even rendered that, and whatever I drew doesn't seem even remotely accurate, but I'd probably want to solve that. I'm also going to go in with a brush back here, and I'm just going to go right back to my marker, because once we leave this tongue, the shadow should be full opacity back there. So once we're off of that surface back here, it shouldn't be faded at all. So I just want to repair that. Make sure that everything out here is unaffected. Looks like it isn't. Okay. Same thing with this line going up the side. This is the part that I'm trying to transition. I don't want to affect anything out there. Grab my eraser. There we go. Okay. And then it gets sharp up here because I think the turning form shadow is gone. There we go. So we'll fill that back in nice and sharp. Okay. Pretty good. Eyeball. Probably don't even need to mask anything off for this one. Actually, there's that. This part right here. Don't want to affect. So just grab all that. Don't want to affect this either. So this one I probably need to use an airbrush to fill this back in just a little bit. Okay. Kind of want to eliminate that line to make sure that it's nice and soft there. But let's get our airbrush real small. And I'm going to adjust this line a little bit. So this is the area I'm editing, but I don't want to hit anything on this side. So there we go, just a little bit. Hard to tell. Oh yeah, I didn't quite do enough. Okay. But you can see how like this can get kind of picky. What am I saying? It can get extremely picky. Oh, you can also, can you see that? There's a little hole in my rendering, probably because the base shape layer had something missing. So I'm going to turn those off. I'd already selected that so we can see it. Grab this, and I need to turn off the transparency lock. There we go. So now when I turn all that stuff back on, no more hole. It can be really hard to spot until you get down to the darker colors. So this part right here, I'm a little perplexed by what I did with that cast shadow in the first place, because that doesn't look right. Oh, I've also lost my color selection. Let's go back up to 100%. That's one reason why you might want to use just plain old black, because then it's easier to get that color back exactly. Okay. But yeah, I'm looking at that and it's like the shadow should really go all the way over here, I think. And then that would make it easier to transition. I'm not sure what I did the first time. Because this is a wrinkle, I guess. I was thinking that I needed to see that, which I guess is true. But while I'm here, get this little bit. Let's fix up that just a tiny bit. Even on sharp bits, you might do a little bit of a transition just so it's not too harsh. You could also go back in afterward and sharpen up all those lines if you wanted to. So each one of these little round things, you want to have a little bit of a transition like this. You can see as long as I'm careful with my brush, it won't affect parts that I don't want it to. But you can always fill back in more shadow. Okay, if the shapes don't look quite right. Like over here, I think we need a little bit more. Like let's go to Eraser. For each of these. This one, it's a pretty tight line, but we still need it a little bit. It's turning over the ear flesh as it goes around this corner. So wider down here and tighter up at the top. And then instant right here because that's just a different object. Okay, same thing here. Just got a little tiny lip. Okay. Gradual on this side, instant on this side. All right, let's call that good for a moment. We've got parts that are working, parts that are not. Because now, oh, I don't want to turn that back on. Now I can turn the layer back down again, turn to multiply, and see how I'm doing it. Let's turn that off. Okay, starting to take shape. Hopefully.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, it looks really cool.
Yeah, it's weird, huh? It's like a marshmallow is starting to have additional form as I do this when I turn off the line layer. Sort of emerging out of a fog or something. It's really bizarre. Like even here now, you can see a lot more form because I'm softening the right things and hardening the right things. With just the occlusion, no shadows, it's always going to look the weirdest, but if you do it right, it can look pretty good. Okay, let's change the base color now because we've gone on long enough with that. I can just color directly over that base shape layer as long as I have transparency locked. It's not a problem. The only reason why you might not is if you want some complex like texturing on some part of it. So if your character was wearing like I don't know, like a tartan pattern, or if I wanted to actually render hair on the surface of the pug, then I might want to have a separate layer entirely, but we don't need to do that. First I'll just apply base colors, then just for the heck of it, maybe we'll do it for like his eyeballs or something like that. Alright, we don't know any of these colors really. I could make them up or I could Google a picture of a pug, but I'm pretty sure it's like a brindle kind of brown. So this would be something like this is the lighter color, I believe, and then the darker color tends towards that or this, like a chocolate kind of brown. So I'm just going to put, wow, what the heck? Oh, wrong tool. I'm just going to put this little swatch down in his body. Okay, and I probably want to switch over to my marker. Again, nice sharp colors. Okay, so we'll say that's going to be our darkest emphasis color. And then something like here, I think, is sort of the lightest color, typically on pugs. For his eyeballs, I'm going to go for a yellowish, not quite white, something like that. So that'll be for the whites of his eyes. For the irises, I believe that they have like hazel to brown kind of eyes, but I might want some flecks of something lighter like an orange in there also, just for kind of interest. So I'll put a little spot of orange there, but then let's get a brighter brown as well. So we'll use that. Pupils usually black. I'm just going to put it somewhere around there though. Okay, so we'll say that's the eyeball, that's the pupil. These are the colors for the iris. This little bit, tear duct, probably needs to be pink. So we'll go something in this kind of salmon area. Nose. Nose is going to be pretty gray, gray-black. Let's go right here, and in fact I'll use the blue spectrum for this. Okay, so that'll be the nose for the moment. Tongue, I could use the same one as this, or I could go for something, I want to say more purple. Purple, not quite that purple. We'll go for like that for the moment. I'm not sure if this is going to be correct or not. So let's just start filling this in. First, I'm going to use that as the base for everything. That was easy. Okay. I don't know where the markings go for the darkness, but I'm pretty sure they go on the ears. So I think I can just fill in the ears to start off with. Then I really do have to look up a picture of a pug to see where the markings are, what the pattern is. I'm going to fill in the eyes, so I'm just not worried about going straight over that. And I also think their muzzle is the darker color, if I'm remembering. You know what? Let's just look up the picture right now, rather than do the guesswork. Pug. Image. Boom. There they are. Adorable. Alright, muzzle is dark, fades through the wrinkles. Looks like around the eyes and tips of the ears generally. Cool. And I'll keep that open over here. Okay. So we'll get the whole muzzle area. It looks like it fades quite a lot, so I don't even really have to be super careful if I don't want to. Okay, let's fill that in. This could be too dark, these colors that I picked, because everything on top of them is multiplying. So what I could do is experiment with either an adjustment layer, such as hue, saturation, brightness. Let's see, what if I go a bit lighter, tiny bit more saturated? Okay, so maybe that'll be better. Or I could pick better colors. And you can't, unfortunately, sample this way, because if I sample this color and then I try to paint with it, it's then adjusted by the adjustment layer. So it's not a very good way to go. You kind of have to merge that together. So I'm just going to leave my choices as the originals were for now. But just know that your color choices should tend towards being a little bit lighter for the purposes of this painting technique. It looks like they even have like dark circles around their eyes too.
Guy liner for pugs.
Yeah. So I'll fill those in. Kind of like that. On the top, I don't see a whole lot, but it does kind of like transition across here. Guy liner. Alright.
Eyeliner?
That's what he said, yeah.
And then just eyeliner?
Eyeliner buff for guys. You know how like
I mean,
there are razors for guys that have names like military weapons should?
I guess.
Alright, so let's try to transition a little bit. Okay. And for this, I'm going to actually utilize both colors here so I don't have to sample over and over. So here I've got my darker color. If I hit X, I can switch to the lighter color. So let's use the darker color like that. That's probably fine. And just a little bit through here so it's not so abrupt. down here. Well, that's a solid shape, so I don't really want to do it there. This one though, like it seems underneath the chin, it does kind of transition, and unfortunately this is creating a sort of secondary shading effect, which I don't really want, but maybe it'll look okay. Okay, so let's go back to marker. Put the whites of the eyes in. This I should probably get up nice and close for. Okay, so another one that it's kind of tough to see through all of my various colors, but I can tell right there that's going to be the pink. So it's okay if I cross into that because it's supposed to overlap. Let's see if I go a little bit too far. Let's turn off those for a moment. Ah, there it is. Okay, so here. Sometimes it can be a good idea to do this step first so you can clearly tell where the boundaries are between your different various objects. Sometimes you can get away with doing it last. There we go. I had to turn that up a bit so I could see what I was doing. In this case, it probably would have been good to do this a little bit earlier, but then you wouldn't have seen the full kind of statue effect. Rotating so I can get a better arm angle. Okay, right about there should do it. Trying to soften that out, round it out. Actually, did I miss the eyeball there? No, I didn't. There's just a second line of my art. Okay, getting them nice and round. There we go. Okay, it's fine. Let's put the pink in its place. For this, I do want these back on, so I could clearly see that I define an edge with the shadows there. Okay, so something like there. There. Okay, that one I'll have to do again, I guess, because I didn't put the white on yet. Okay, let's turn those back off for a sec. What's going on? Oh, that's just my, yeah. I'm going to paint a little bit farther just to see that line. Okay, there's that line. I want to hit it right here. You can see why I'm not doing the entire body. Even this much is taking forever to demonstrate. But I probably will finish this because it's fun. And I like this drawing from way back. Okay, we need a little bit of brown there. Although, local color might be like a little bit salmon right along this line. If we could see like the edge of the eyelid or something, you could put a little bit of pink on there. I wonder how that would be. We'll just leave that and see what happens. Kind of neat. All right, missed just a little bit right here. Some transition there I'd probably have to fix with a softer brush. It's okay. Same thing over here. I was a little bit too cavalier about it, but we'll just leave it for the moment. Let's do the irises. So this is a really good candidate, I think, for using another clipping layer because I want to decorate the irises, but I don't want it to interfere with any of the rest of the stuff that I've just done. So I'm going to start with the brightest color, my yellow, and just make a larger brush. Just kind of vaguely fill in the same shape I originally did. Go right here. Okay, so then I can lock that layer and I can decorate as much as I want. Let's do this one too though. Okay, so now lock the transparency of that layer. Grab my other color, turn that off. get an airbrush. Now when I look at the actual pug over on the screen here, they've really got very brown eyes as opposed to this yellow that I've done. But I don't care. I kind of want to do what I want to do. I'm going to do this and that. And then maybe I'll put in a little bit of orange too. We're going to do that. Okay, I'm going to grab some... Oh wait, no, I didn't get that light of a color. So I'm going to put on a little bit of orange. I'll actually put it on this side. A bit smaller. And then if I wanted to do like fibers in the irises or something like that, then I could spend all that time, but I'm just doing little highlights here. Alright, let me get that darker color one more time. Want a much darker edge. Okay, and we'll get that pupil color, and this one I should just be able to go right over the top, but I do need my harder brush for that. Okay, what's funnier, tiny little pupils or gigantic ones? I think it's got to be gigantic ones. Two different sized ones. I don't know. Maybe that. They do look like maniacs. Okay.
It's amazing.
It's a maniac. So this also gives me the ability to like put additional effects like right behind the iris if I want to. For now I'm going to just leave it like that, but I think I would want to darken in the outer edge just a little bit more. How are we doing though? It's getting there. We need that tongue. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So the tongue would be another one, probably a good candidate to separate out into this layer. Heck, since I'm already using it, let's do that. Let's get rid of those shadows so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. So you like it, Brad? Sounded like you did. Oh. Hard eraser if I'm going to do this. Oh wait, no, because I'm painting. Oh no, I am on a different layer now. Okay. Sometimes easy to lose track. Okay. And then the nose. Oh. Lower side of this is a little hard to see. I think that's probably all I need to do. Although it goes farther on this side. Okay. Cool. So we're getting there. All right. Well, it's been a while since I've asked, so any questions so far?
Tabor, is there like a certain light source you're depending it on for the shadows? Sorry, I was late when you were doing the shadow part.
Why, yes. The holy glow of this sausage boy.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, just kind of like heavenly light coming from above was the sort of idea as I was thinking about it. All right, so when I turn off my line work, obviously there's a lot yet to do. There's very little definition on some important things like the wrinkles on the head, and we really don't have very much in the way of like highlights because we're only working with the dark colors. So you may want to pick artificially bright things, but all of that stuff is things that we can do over top of this in the same way that we're currently working as either special effects or as just additional passes. So if I looked at this and I decided, you know what, this dark brown is great, but what I really need are some lighter colors in the lit areas, then I can just make new layers on top. Oh, what was that layer? Oh, that was just a little demonstration thing. I can make new layers on top. I can either put it as a part of the clipping mask or not, depending on how loosely I want to work. And I can just paint them right over the top there. So I'm just going to use this pink here for a moment. Choose an airbrush and just go over the muzzle area, kind of like that. Now it's like he's blushing. And then I'm going to erase back a bit so it's not getting all over everything, just so I've got kind of a pool of light over that area. And then I'd probably want to remove it from the nose because it doesn't belong there. I'm just trying to spill light over this region and blend it a little bit better. Let's get right down in there. And I'll choose my eraser. Or depending on how much layer control you've got, I could even put this behind the nose color because I think it was on a different layer. Let's get rid of that a little bit. Oh, went too far. Okay. By doing this on a completely different layer like that, I've got control over tuning it. So now I could turn it off and on to see a comparison, and I could turn the opacity down, and I could even mess with its blending layer. Probably going to use the light ones this time. Lighten, screen, color dodge makes it way too red. Linear dodge makes it yellower, which is kind of nicer. Okay, but you see how now it's getting even more three-dimensional with that. Okay, don't want to do this too much because the whole point was to work only towards shadows, but if you find that you need it after you've done a bunch of work, it's always an option. Might get it out of that crease area though. Gonna lose the definition that we worked so hard to get if it's just going everywhere. This even could be like a clipping mask over the shadow areas if you wanted to add texture to the shadows or additional transition to the shadows. A lot of stuff you could do. I'm just going to get rid of all this stuff that isn't this muzzle shape. Oh, that one didn't work so well. There we go. I don't know if I erased too much or not. I can't quite see. Oh, that's fine. Okay, so now that's probably a big improvement, I feel. Okay, if I want to keep painting with the same color, remember that this layer has only 79% opacity and it's set to linear dodge. So I might want to save this color somewhere, but usually I'm just using that one. Or turn it back up to 100% opacity and keep painting. There's also lots of details, depending on how realistic you want your painting to be, that we're not including, like the grain in the hair, these little whiskers, the texture on any one of the surface, and of course the reflections and stuff like that. Just for one extra example, let's make his eyes look shiny, because that's a pretty standard thing that we'd want to do. Just check all those. Just trying to see which one of those is giving me this weird shadow on this eyeball. Looks like it's the occlusion one. So just real fast. Make sure that that is not intruding that way. So it's, yeah, it ends up being a little bit tough. Probably want to use an airbrush eraser for part of it, but just kind of repairing some of the work that I did. You can also turn this back up to 100% and normal. Now we can see more clearly what we're doing. And yeah, it's just like there's a bit kind of just sticking into here. Right, so I'd probably want to attempt this over again, or just change the shaping on that other layer that is disagreeing. Let's put it back. So if it looks fine like that, it actually doesn't. I could trim down the color. So on the base layer, let's grab. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to trim down the color on the base layer with this showing to make it agree. So we need to go there. Okay, so be careful as you're doing this. But yeah, let's make this eyeball look shiny. So usually you're going to have both the light direction and then also an environmental reflection. The shinier something is, the less of a specular highlight you'll get, and the more of a reflection you will get. So let's just say that the light is a little bit yellow like this, and if I just dropped in like that, it's fine, you know, cartoony. We could try to improve upon that by making it softer. Okay, but it's not really doing it. What we're going to need is a reflection of like the light source and a little bit of the environment. We don't know what the environment looks like, but typically there are some patterns that you can observe. Let's get a dark color actually to start off with. I'm just going to make a big blurry dark shape through this eye like that. Okay, and I'll trim it all down and everything, but the reason I'm doing that is because if you're reflecting the environment, usually you can see the horizon versus the sky somewhere in the eye. And things will distort more towards the edge of a round thing. So here's what I tend to do is like put a few spiky shapes and wavy shapes through like this, and then just delete all of that out. And it's going to look pretty extreme until I finish, so give me a moment. But this would be like trees or houses or something like that that's nearby, and you just get a little bit more distortion near the edges. Okay, so there's the start to it, and we're going to have to blend these in. I'll also get a hard eraser. Let's go, yep, hard transparent eraser. Or I could just make this a clipping mask to be really careful. Let's get rid of that. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to do is fade this out as it goes down. Not sure why I'm not using the clipping mask. Probably a bad idea to do that. Okay. And of course, not going to appear over there. In fact, let's just get rid of it. Okay. All right, so there's one side. Make sure I remove almost all of it. Okay. Trim this down. We're also going to want the reflection of the light itself, because from this angle we could probably see directly at the shiny light in the sky up here, and that's where you get that kind of anime sparkle thing that you see all the time in cartoons and whatnot. Okay. Almost there. Really should have used a clipping mask. We'll just say I'm demonstrating the hard way, just so you guys don't do this. That plausible?
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Or maybe I'm just dumb. I think I'm just dumb. Alright, so there we go. Let me turn down the opacity a little bit here. Sometimes we want a blending mode, but meh. I'm also going to use an airbrush eraser. Okay. Larger one. I'm just going to kind of fade that whole thing out so that really that transition edge is what I want. There we go. And let's turn this down farther. Something like that. Let's try it. Blending mode. Overlay. Soft light. something in here. Sort of doing it. Oh, some of those were working. Linear light, pin light. Oh, too much. Probably weird that I did this with the dark shape instead of the light shape, but yeah. Probably should have done it with the light shape, the inverse of this. Okay, well. Oh, that sort of works. The wrong color though. Oh well. I'll just bring it back to the normal and just leave it at a lower opacity. So then on top of this, let's get our light shape. It really depends on what the light is. Like, I mean, if it's the sun, it's going to look like the sun. If it's like internal lighting, it's going to look square or whatever. So this is just some sort of like holy light in the sky. So I'll say we'll probably see it right about there, I think. So I'm going to do a big yellow shape and then small, much, much brighter shape. Big yellow shape, then smaller focused shape like that. Like that. And we can put in more than one of these if we want to. Like if there's some other light sources off to the side or something, then we could have like a second one over here. But it's going to kind of cover over all of this stuff somewhat. And you want them to be in agreement with each other. It's better if it crosses over the colored part of the eye, the iris, than it is the whites. But we're starting to get some of that effect. I think it needs more thought and a little bit less hastiness from me, but starting to get there. Okay. And we can do stuff like that on the tongue and on the nose and stuff because they are shiny. So probably we'd have the effect of like saliva making some sort of specular lines here and here for the tongue of some kind, and probably across the top, at least on one side for the nose, and maybe little bits here and there, depending on the texture. But yeah, not going to just put it in like that because it's going to look really, really lazy if I do that. Okay. In addition to that stuff, you could put in little tiny details. So I'll just say some hairs. For this, I'll go for ink, but depends on where it is. Like we might have little hair. Wow, that's way too deep. Yeah, we might have like little hairs visibly sticking out from the surface or something, or actual whisker hairs, and you're going to have to justify that with like texture on the actual surface to show those pores, because you can see that on any dog like this one, where those whiskers are coming from. You can see little edge highlights on the lower rim of the eye or lower rim of the lip. Lots of stuff that we could do. And I'm kind of going for comedy here, and so I'd have like these big gnarly, whiskers kind of sticking out all over the place. But I'm also trying to make a relatively nice drawing, so I'd have to coincide those two things. By the way, if you're doing something as thin as whiskers, you need the highlight color as well, like that, as well as the low light color. And it's really hard to get them lined up perfectly, so you could lock your transparency or just, zoom in, do it like a smart person. But hairs reflect light too, so you don't just get the dark colors, you get the light colors and the dark colors depending on angle, and that's something that can help them to look a lot more like actual hair. Well, went too far on this one, but yeah. Okay, we got the basic idea. Feeling confident?
Yeah.
Large and in charge? Yeah.
We can do it.
You can do it. That's the spirit. All right, you guys, so I'm going to leave off the demonstration for that. I may finish this at some point. Hopefully, if I remember, I'll record fast forwarding through it. But you've seen all the important steps. Okay? Any questions?
Oh, there
Shit,
was,
I disconnected, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry if there's background noise. They're power washing my house. But there's casting shadows, and then there was something else you said. There was
Turning form shadows.
Oh, okay.
So just imagine a ball. On the surface of the ball from light side to dark side, it gradually gets darker. That's a turning form.
Okay.
Right. Same thing with a cylinder. With a box, that doesn't happen. You've got light sides and dark sides and darker sides, but it doesn't gradually shift because it's not bent.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Saber, is it possible that we can like show you our progress like on Monday or something like that?
Of course.
Okay then, thank you.
Just send messages and put your progress in the class channel, and then everybody can see it.
Alrighty then.
Cool. Anybody else? If that's it, that's it.